Most horror movies can be placed into a box. There's the slasher, the haunted house movie, the possession movie, and the monster movie. And while there's nothing wrong with those genres, after a while, they can start to feel predictable. That's one of the reasons Obsession stands out. Because instead of relying on a mass killer or a supernatural creature, this movie turns something much more familiar into its source of horror, a person. Specifically, Nikki. And that's where I think Obsession becomes genuinely fascinating. One of the most unsettling things about the film is how Nikki falls directly into what's known as the uncanny valley. Usually we think of the uncanny valley as applying to robots, AI, or computer-generated humans. They're close enough to being human that they should feel normal, but something is slightly off. And that slightly off feeling becomes deeply unsettling. Nikki creates that exact feeling. She's human, she looks human, and she sounds human, but the way she behaves after the wish is granted doesn't feel human anymore. Every smile feels forced, every interaction feels wrong, every conversation creates this feeling that something underneath the surface isn't functioning correctly. The movie never needs to tell you that something is wrong. You can feel it. That's what makes Nikki so effective as a horror character. She's not scary because she's violent. She's scary because she's familiar. Everyone has met people before. Everyone understands how human beings are supposed to behave. So when Nikki starts breaking those expectations, the audience immediately notices. The result is a level of discomfort that many horror movies struggle to achieve. But Nikki isn't the only reason the movie works. The soundtrack deserves a lot of credit as well. One of my favorite examples is the piece Are You Okay? Throughout the film, the music often mirrors or reinforces the emotional tone of the story. There's this feeling that the soundtrack understands exactly what the audience should be feeling before they even realize it themselves. Instead of screaming, "This is scary," the music quietly builds tension. It lingers. It hangs in the background. And it slowly makes situations feel more uncomfortable than they would otherwise. And that's exactly what's happening here. The music works almost like another character in the movie, constantly reminding you that something isn't right. Another reason Obsession is worth seeing is because it feels original, and originality is becoming increasingly rare these days. A lot of modern horror relies on familiar formulas. A killer chases a victim, a demon possesses someone, a monster hunts someone down. You generally know what you're getting before the movie even starts. With Obsession, the horror comes out from a concept that feels fresh. The movie asks a simple question: what if the person you've always wanted suddenly wanted you back? At first, that sounds like a dream, but the movie quickly reveals how terrifying that idea can actually become. The horror doesn't come from something chasing the characters, it comes from someone loving them too much. That's not a premise you see very often. What makes it even more effective is that the film doesn't feel like it's trying to imitate other successful horror movies. It has its own identity, its own tone, its own style. And that's one of the biggest reasons people continue talking about it. But beyond the horror elements, I think the movie succeeds because it's ultimately about control. At its core, Bear wants to control something that was never supposed to be controlled: love. Relationships only work when people have a choice. The moment that choice is removed, everything becomes artificial. And that's just really what the movie is exploring. Not just obsession, but the consequences of forcing something that should happen naturally. It's a surprisingly mature theme for a horror movie, and it gives the story more depth than many people might expect. By the end of the film, you're not just thinking about what happened, you're thinking about why it happened. And those are usually the movies that stay with people the longest. So why is Obsession worth seeing? Because Nikki is one of the most unsettling horror characters in recent memory, because the story feels original in a genre that often repeats itself a lot, and because underneath all of the horror is a genuinely interesting idea about love, control, and consequences. You may not think it's the scariest movie ever made, you may not think it's perfect, but chances are you'll still be thinking about it after the credits roll. That's exactly what great horror is supposed to do.